Hi everyone, welcome to English Story School, where we make learning English exciting and memorable through the magic of storytelling. Have you ever found yourself completely perplexed by the things women say and do? Maybe everything seems perfectly fine one moment, but then a shift happens. You're left wondering what went wrong or what subtle hint you might have missed. If you've ever thought, I just don't understand women, know that you're not alone. Many feel they're navigating a mysterious terrain, one filled with miscommunications and misunderstandings. But here's the real question. Is it truly impossible to understand? Or is there a way to bridge this gap with a few insights and a new perspective? Understanding another person is often a journey, not a destination, especially when their perspective differs from our own. Often people believe that if they just crack the code of what someone else is thinking or feeling, they'll have the key to a smoother, simpler relationship. This mindset, however, can lead us down a path of frustration and disappointment. Instead of treating understanding like a puzzle to solve, what if we approached it as an open, ongoing dialogue? When we talk about understanding women, or anyone for that matter, we have to first look at the lens through which we view the world. Each of us carries a set of beliefs, expectations, and assumptions shaped by personal experience, culture, and the specific situations we've encountered in life. For men and women, these lenses can be influenced by social conditioning and cultural norms, which sometimes foster different communication styles, emotional expressions, and priorities. Women, for example, may have been socialized to prioritize emotional connection, vulnerability, or empathy, and might express themselves in ways that emphasize these values. Men, on the other hand, may have been encouraged to approach conversations more pragmatically or to look for solutions. These differences don't mean one way is better than the other, just that they arise from different sets of experiences. When we approach understanding with an answer-seeking mentality, we often focus too much on dissecting what someone says or does, rather than accepting their thoughts and feelings as they are. It's like trying to read a book with the goal of skipping to the end to find out what happens. You might miss the richness of the story along the way. In our eagerness to understand, we may forget that some things are meant to be experienced moment by moment rather than solved like a formula. True understanding is less about decoding words and more about listening with openness and respect. Listening, in this sense, goes beyond hearing the words someone says. It involves observing how they say it, noticing their tone, body language, and the subtle emotional cues that often reveal what's underneath their words. When we listen with the goal of simply being present, we create a space that allows someone to be themselves fully, without the pressure of judgment, expectation, or the need for them to fit into a pre-existing understanding. A lot of misunderstandings happen because we're so quick to respond, to analyze, or to interpret that we don't leave room for the other person to simply be heard. We're trained to seek patterns, to match what we're hearing to something familiar. But this drive for figuring it out can actually cause us to lose sight of the individual in front of us. People aren't riddles or mysteries to be solved. They're complex beings with a mix of experiences, emotions, and perspectives that may never be fully understood by anyone but themselves. By shifting our approach from solution-seeking to curiosity, we give ourselves permission to let go of the need to find immediate answers, and instead, just listen. This kind of listening requires humility, as we accept that we may not fully grasp everything right away. Instead of expecting others to communicate in a way that aligns with our own experiences, we're open to the way they naturally express themselves. This doesn't mean we'll always understand right away, or that it won't sometimes be confusing, but it does mean that we respect their individuality, their right to express themselves in a way that's true to them. People are shaped by so much more than we see on the surface: personal experiences, values, dreams, insecurities, and even the ways society has influenced them. When we realize that everyone has a unique backstory, we approach them not as a type, but as an individual with thoughts and feelings as real and deep as our own. Women, like men, are shaped by a variety of influences and hold layers of experiences that can't be summarized or easily categorized. Their perspective isn't a mystery meant to frustrate, but a perspective that invites us to open our own and to embrace differences as opportunities for growth. When we allow ourselves to simply be present and listen without trying to figure it all out, we create the potential for genuine connection. This doesn't mean there won't be misunderstandings or moments of confusion, but it does mean that instead of trying to control the situation, we're open to learning from it. Understanding someone else isn't about simplifying their perspective to make it easier for us. It's about expanding our capacity for empathy and recognizing that understanding is an ongoing process. In a world that's constantly urging us to rush, fix, and figure things out, slowing down to just listen and be present can feel almost radical. But this simple shift in approach often reveals more than any solution-focused mindset could. When we let go of rigid expectations, we open ourselves to seeing others as they truly are, not as puzzles, but as people. And in that openness, real understanding begins. Assumptions, those seemingly harmless thoughts we form without much notice, are often the invisible barriers that prevent us from truly connecting with others. Imagine walking into a conversation already convinced you know how it will go, or what someone is really saying. It's natural. Our brains are wired to make quick judgments and pattern match based on previous experiences. But while this tendency is helpful in some areas of life, when it comes to understanding others, especially in close relationships, it can lead us astray. One of the biggest challenges we face in understanding people, particularly in relationships with women or anyone who approaches the world from a perspective different from our own, is recognizing the assumptions we bring into conversations. Often, we aren't even aware that we're carrying these assumptions with us. They've become part of our mental shortcuts, guiding how we interpret what someone says or does. The problem arises when these shortcuts get in the way of seeing the person in front of us clearly. For instance, if we assume that every frustration expressed is a problem to be solved, we'll jump to solutions without first checking if that's even what the person needs. Listening with an assumption is like trying to see through tinted glasses. Everything takes on a shade of our own biases and preconceptions. One common assumption, for example, is that we listen in order to reply. In conversation, this translates into preparing a response while the other person is still talking. In doing so, we're actually missing half of what's being said. Instead of hearing someone out fully, we're mentally preparing our counterpoints, defenses, or solutions. This not only blocks us from truly understanding their message, but can also frustrate the person speaking. They might feel unheard, or worse, dismissed. The subtle art of listening to understand, rather than to reply, is transformative. When you listen to understand, you allow yourself to stay in the moment with the other person. This kind of listening means resisting the urge to interrupt, interpret, or steer the conversation based on your own agenda. Instead, you approach the dialogue with curiosity, giving the other person the space to express themselves fully. And here's the secret: people can sense when they're being truly heard. There's an unmistakable feeling of respect that arises when someone realizes you're interested in understanding them, not just in offering your own perspective. Take, for instance, a scenario where someone says, "I had a really difficult day and I'm exhausted." Our initial reaction might be to give advice. "Why don't you take a break? Maybe you should get more sleep." But what if their statement wasn't about finding a solution, but rather about wanting empathy or acknowledgement? By assuming they're looking for advice, we risk shutting down what could be an opportunity for genuine connection. Instead, if we approach the statement with curiosity, "That sounds really hard. Do you want to talk about it?" We give the other person room to share more about what they're feeling, without the pressure to fit into our preconceived expectations. Building understanding is often about stepping away from the urge to find universal rules about what women or anyone thinks. This approach may feel challenging at first because it requires letting go of control and the certainty of knowing the answer. But by embracing patience and curiosity, we shift from an outcome-focused mindset to one that values the journey of understanding itself. We learn that it's not about gathering a collection of rules, but rather about building a relationship based on respect and trust. When you listen without needing to fix or respond right away, you're telling the other person, "I value what you have to say, and I'm here for you." This creates an atmosphere of safety and trust, one in which people feel comfortable opening up. In this environment, misunderstandings start to dissolve. You no longer have to decode every word or action. Instead, communication flows naturally. By being fully present, you allow the other person to share what's truly on their mind without the pressure of having to fit into your expectations or assumptions. Think of it as planting seeds of trust and understanding. Each time you listen without rushing to respond or fix things, you're watering these seeds. With time, they grow into a strong foundation for connection. This foundation doesn't come from solving problems, but from the act of listening itself. The irony is that once we stop trying so hard to figure it all out, we often end up with a much clearer picture of who the other person is and what they need. In the end, understanding isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the willingness to be present, to listen deeply, and to remain open. When we approach conversations without assumptions, we make space for genuine communication and connection. And in that space, true understanding can flourish. One of the most powerful, yet underappreciated aspects of communication is understanding and validating emotions. It sounds simple, but in practice, it's a skill that can transform relationships, particularly when it comes to bridging different communication styles. Many people, especially those who grew up in environments where feelings weren't openly discussed, may not be used to engaging in conversations that are more about emotional expression than problem solving. Recognizing that others, including many women, often communicate to share, connect, and feel heard, not necessarily to receive advice or solutions, can open up a world of deeper, more fulfilling connections. Let's start with why emotional expression plays such an important role in communication. Each of us learns how to express ourselves largely based on our upbringing and social influences. Think of it as a language we start learning from childhood. In some families or cultures, open expression of feelings is encouraged, and people are taught that sharing emotions builds closeness. In others, practicality and problem-solving are prioritized, and emotional expression may be seen as a distraction from getting things done. Both styles have their strengths, but they lead to different approaches to communication. For many women, conversation isn't just about exchanging information, but about creating a shared experience. It's about weaving a connection that says, I trust you with my thoughts and feelings, and I want to trust that you will hold them gently. When someone shares a frustration or a personal struggle, it's often not an invitation for a fix-it response. Instead, it's an invitation for empathy, understanding, and validation. Imagine a friend says, I had the toughest day at work. My boss didn't appreciate any of my efforts, and I feel completely overlooked. A common impulse might be to jump in with suggestions like, maybe you should talk to your boss, or maybe it's time to look for a new job. While this advice might be practical, it often misses the underlying need to feel understood and supported in the moment. Here's where the magic of validation comes in. When someone expresses frustration or hurt, what they often need most isn't advice, but simply to feel that their feelings are recognized. Validating someone's emotions doesn't mean you're necessarily agreeing with their perspective or condoning a particular reaction. It just means you're acknowledging that their feelings are real and understandable. Responding with something like, wow, that sounds really hard. I can see why you'd feel that way, tells the other person, I hear you. Your feelings are valid. This creates a sense of emotional safety that can help them feel seen and valued. Empathy is a bridge, and validation is how you build it. When you validate someone's feelings, you're saying, I am here with you in this moment, and I understand why you feel the way you do. This simple acknowledgement can ease tension and invite a more profound, open conversation. The power of this approach lies in its ability to transform communication from a transactional exchange into a shared emotional experience. Consider the impact of saying, I understand why you'd feel that way. This phrase has a way of disarming the other person, allowing them to relax and feel accepted. When you choose to validate rather than respond with solutions, you're creating space for them to explore and process their feelings without judgment or pressure. This shift can be particularly helpful in relationships where one person tends to approach things more analytically or practically, and the other values emotional connection. Interestingly, focusing on validation often has a side benefit. It encourages the other person to open up even more. Once they feel heard and acknowledged, they're often more receptive to other perspectives, including solutions, if that's eventually part of the conversation. But by leading with empathy, you prioritize understanding and connection, which creates a stronger foundation for communication overall. It's worth noting that validating emotions doesn't mean you're obligated to agree with everything someone says. Validation is about acknowledging that their experience is real and matters. This approach can even be helpful in situations where you don't fully understand or relate to the other person's feelings. For example, if someone feels anxious about a situation that wouldn't bother you, you can still respond with something like, I get why that would feel overwhelming. It sounds like a lot to handle. This response acknowledges their experience without dismissing it or making it about your own reaction. For many people, especially those accustomed to giving advice, learning to validate emotions can feel challenging at first. But with practice, it becomes a skill that strengthens every relationship in your life. Instead of racing to find the right response or solution, try to focus on the person in front of you and what they might be feeling. Often, they aren't asking you to fix anything. They're simply asking for understanding. In a world that often pushes us to rush, fix, and move on to the next task, slowing down to validate someone's emotions can be a profoundly impactful gesture. It tells them, I value you enough to simply be present with you. This isn't only helpful in conversations with women, but in all kinds of relationships, from friendships to family dynamics. When we make the effort to connect through empathy and validation, we're building stronger, more meaningful connections that enrich both our lives and the lives of those we care about. In any conversation, words are just the tip of the iceberg. While we often focus on what someone is saying, there's an entire world of meaning hidden beneath the surface in the form of unspoken cues. These cues, such as tone of voice, body language, facial expressions, and even the pauses between words, offer powerful insights into a person's thoughts and emotions. Tuning into these subtleties doesn't just help us understand what someone is trying to communicate. It deepens the connection and allows us to respond in a way that truly resonates with them. Let's dive into how these unspoken cues work and why they're so crucial in building better, more empathetic communication. For instance, think about tone of voice. You could say something as simple as, I'm fine, in a dozen different ways, each with a distinct emotional nuance. A soft, calm tone could indicate genuine contentment, while a sharper or more clipped tone might suggest frustration or annoyance. If you only listen to the words, you might miss the true message behind them. By tuning into the tone, you can begin to understand the person's emotional state on a much deeper level, often before they even consciously express it. Then there's body language, a silent but incredibly telling aspect of communication. Body language often reflects our feelings and intentions even when we're trying to hide them. For example, crossed arms can suggest defensiveness, insecurity, or discomfort, while leaning in during a conversation can signal engagement and interest. Watching how someone's posture shifts can give you valuable insight into how they're feeling in the moment. If they start to withdraw physically, perhaps by turning slightly away or avoiding eye contact, it might indicate they're feeling vulnerable or uncomfortable. On the other hand, if they maintain eye contact and mirror your gestures, it can be a sign of trust and openness. Consider, too, how people use facial expressions, which are some of the most expressive tools in our communication toolkit. A fleeting smile, a furrowed brow, or even a small frown can reveal layers of emotion that words alone might struggle to capture. For example, if someone's talking about a happy memory but has a hint of sadness in their eyes, it might suggest a complex mix of nostalgia or loss that they haven't fully verbalized. When we pick up on these expressions and acknowledge them, it can lead to conversations that go beyond surface level, where people feel genuinely seen and understood. Even the pauses between words hold meaning. Silence is often considered an absence of communication, but it can be incredibly meaningful if you know how to interpret it. A pause might signal hesitation or a need for space to gather thoughts. Sometimes it's an invitation for you to step in with support or to encourage them to continue. On the other hand, filling every gap with words can rush the conversation, especially if the other person is processing complex feelings.